Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for EMBCA's fifth Hellenic East Mediterranean Energy Independence Forum webinar panel discussion. My name is Katsos, EMBCA's president, and today's discussion will be moderated by Konstantine Drougos, CEO of OASIS Carbon Management Group and an EMBCA director. Our distinguished panel includes Dr. George Stathakis, former Hellenic Minister of Energy, and Dr. Mihalis Karmis, former director of the Coal and Energy Research Center at Virginia Tech. Energy dependence has been identified as one of a variety of factors, including energy resources diversification, energy suppliers diversification, energy sources fungibility, energy transport, market liquidity, energy resources, political stability, energy intensity, and GDP, negatively contributing to energy security. As such, a high level of energy dependence is risk-prone because of possible interference of commodity price fluctuations, trade wars, international armed conflicts, terrorist attacks, etc. Energy independence, on the other hand, is in a way an idealized status that at present can only be approximated by exploration of a country's natural resources, including renewable and non-renewable resources. The Hellenic Republic, although a small energy consumer, based on its geographical position, favors her to become a vital corridor for transporting gas and electricity from the east to the west. The Hellenic Republic is actively pursuing energy independence by reducing reliance on fossil fuel imports and promoting renewable energy. Historically dependent on imported oil and natural gas, the country faces challenges such as energy price volatility and geopolitical risks. To address these, ELAS is focusing on renewable energy expansion, energy storage, international interconnections, and phasing out of fossil fuels. Currently, renewables such as solar, wind, and hydropower account for nearly half of its electricity production. The Hellenic government aims to increase the share to 70% by 2030, with major investments in solar parks, onshore wind farms, and upcoming offshore wind projects. Energy storage technologies, such as battery systems and pumped hydro, are also being developed to ensure grid stability by balancing the intermittency of renewables. International energy interconnections play a role in ELAS's strategy. Projects like the Euro-Asia and Euro-Africa interconnectors will allow the transfer of electricity between the Hellenic Republic, Cyprus, Israel, and Egypt, enhancing energy security and regional cooperation. Additionally, the Hellenic Republic is exploring green hydrogen to decarbonize heavy industries and transportation sectors. In the long term, ELAS plans to phase out coal-fired power plants by 2028 and gradually reduce natural gas dependence. The shift towards energy efficiency and the electrification of transportation will further support this transition. ELAS is also leveraging European Union funding and foreign investments to finance these initiatives and sustainability. Through these efforts, it aims to secure its energy needs, align with EU climate goals, and to position itself as a regional energy hub in Southeast Europe. Join us then for this very interesting discussion, which we will have with experts in the field, and they will discuss present and future energy independence strategy, as well as the changing geopolitical aspects around it, including the recent US elections and the ongoing conflicts in the region, both southeast and north of the Hellenic Republic. An introduction of our moderator, who many of you know. Konstantine Drougos studied computer science, business and public administration, and political science at Indiana State University and George Mason University. He has held executive and non-executive roles in Europe and in the Americas. They include, among many, as advisor to the Hellenic LLC, a developer of a major geothermal energy project in northern Greece and Virginia, USA, director of Anika Solutions Fuel Trading, general partner at Hellenic Euphoria Fund, a newly created fund investing in biomass to biomass projects in Greece, head of OASIS Carbon Management Group, and managing director of Argo Marketing International Consultants, a shipping and finance consulting firm. Konstantine is a frequent speaker on Hellenic U.S. relations, entrepreneurship, and professional development. He also serves as a member of the board of the East Mediterranean Business Cultural Alliance, EMBCA, a leading Hellenic American organization, and heads its Hellenic Shipping Memorial and Energy Committees. He is also a member of AHEPA, the largest Hellenic American organization in the world. Welcome, Konstantine, and thank you for being our moderator today.
Thank you, Lou, and thank you, Mihalis and George, for being with us tonight. It's been about a year since the last program, and a lot of things have happened. So it's good to talk about energy and Greece and how it all fits. And I'd like to start. There is a long history of non-fulfilled prophecies, of catastrophes, from Nostradamus to most recent Greta. There is a lot of talk about things will go bad and we're not going to be around in the next few years. And I think we have two experts with us today. We were supposed to have three, but due to a climate-caused catastrophe in Panorama in Thessaloniki, our friend Paris Kokorotsikos could not be with us today because he doesn't have electricity. Which is actually happening more often in the US than it's happening in Greece. When something happens in the US, it takes much longer to get electricity back. Usually in Greece, it takes like a few hours. So we shouldn't complain that much about it. I'd like to introduce, first of all, our two distinguished speakers. And first of all, with Dr. Michael Karmis. Dr. Karmis, upon his retirement from Virginia Tech after 44 years of service, was recognized as a Stone Barker Professor Emeritus of Mining and Minerals Engineering and Director Emeritus of the Virginia Center for Coal and Energy Research. He now serves as Managing Partner of Michael Karmis, LLC. His expertise is in the areas of geomechanics, carbon management, energy planning, and the sustainable development of energy and mineral resources. He has authored and co-authored over 180 scientific papers and directed more than 62 major projects funded by federal and state agencies, foundations, and the private sector. A professional engineer, PE, Dr. Karmis is an active consultant to the global mining and energy industries, academic and research institutions, government agencies, engineering companies, and financial and legal firms. He has also served as a 2002 president of the Society for Mining, Metallurgy, and Exploration, SME, and as the 2008 president of the American Institute of Mining, Metallurgical, and Petroleum Engineers, AIME. He is elected in 2002 president of the Society of Mining Professors and Società de Bergouw Kunde. I got it right, I think. And served from 2005 to 2012 as the Society's Secretary General. He's an honorary member of the AIME, the Society of Mining, the American Institute of Mining and Metallurgical Engineers, and also fellow and a registered member of SME. He's received numerous awards and recognitions by major scientific, educational, professional, and industrial organizations. Our next guest here today is Dr. Stathakis. Georgos Stathakis studied economics at the University of Athens and Newcastle. He was a visiting scholar to the Center of European Studies and Harvard University and the Center of Modern Greek Studies, City University of New York. He taught as a professor of political economy at the University of Crete from 1988 to 2021, and served as vice rector of the university and head of the economics department. He was elected as a member of parliament with the Syriza in the election of 2012 and 15, and served as a minister of development from 2015 to the 16. In some of the hardest years, it was during the memorandums, and a minister of environment and energy from 2017 to 2019. Among his publications are the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, the reform of the CAP, which is a common agricultural policy, and the rural development in Southern Europe, and the economic development and social change, among others. So welcome, gentlemen. Good afternoon in Blacksburg, Mihalis, and New York, Lou, and good evening, George, in Athens, where I am as well. So there's a lot of things are happening today, from big oil to big green. And there is a big bill that has to be footed. And a lot of things have changed, like the elections in the United States, which I'm sure you're going to touch upon, Michael, since you are in the midst of it over there, and you're well aware of what is happening. So we're looking forward to an exciting panel. But I like, in 1970, Time magazine announced that terror, mostly from freeze, will happen. So in 1970, the terror was coming from freezing the earth. Then in 1980s, switched to terrors to heat, but from the wrong gas. It was the ozone at the time. And then in the 1989 Time magazine, it finally announced that the right terror gas was CO2. It might sound confusing to most people, since most people we're not experts or scientists in the field. So I'd like to start with you, Michael, to give us an idea of the international scene and some of the things that you know well.
Thank you very much, and a pleasure to be part of this webinar. Before focusing on the Greek national energy effort, which is the main theme of this particular event today, I think it's very prudent to consider the current state of the global green transition. And it is, we have to appreciate, a global transition. It's not a regional one. Energy incorporates challenges and opportunities beyond individual national borders. It is therefore a truly grand global challenge. And we should look at it at that, and that is what drove the multinational Paris Agreement. In looking at this universe that is impacted by energy, we must also remember that the world is not flat. There is developing countries and developed countries, or if you will, like developed countries and emerging economies, as the United Nations prefer to use. Emerging economies currently have 2 billion people who have either no power, no electricity, or they are under interrupted electricity kind of conditions. And also we need to remember that by the year 2050, we will have added another 2.5 billion people. This is an awful lot of people to get power, and a lot of people who don't have any and they want some. And that has tremendous impacts on the dealings and agreements and everything else that has happened during the green energy transition, which were very evident in the most recent meeting that I will refer later of the United Nations, that it was very difficult to achieve any kind of an agreement. So the Paris Agreement and the transition to the green energy was based on aspirational goals and an aggressive decarbonization plan implemented using global and national treaties. And it was important to achieve specific greenhouse gas reductions and meet green targets with strict deadlines, right? Didn't give enough time to everything. The deadlines were set. Now, the mitigation that impacts of all that, of decarbonization, and what it takes to happen, were never properly considered by those who had this major vision of the Paris Agreement. We said at the time, at least my community, that there is not enough raw material to do this, and everybody smiled. And then they said, oh yes, you guys in mining business, you always say this. But it was a seminal report that the World Bank did in 2017, 2 years after the Paris Agreement, who said the following: little analysis, if any, was conducted on the material implications and mineral supply chain of a carbon-constrained future, as the mining production for clean energy technologies would need to rise by at least 400%. Just think about this, 400% to meet climate goals in an industry who, let's say, sees its production on millions of tons. 400% is a humongous, unattainable number. If you want to know the updated projections as of 2024, I will give you just 3 examples. Nickel for batteries has to increase by 500%, silver for solar panels by 1,000%, copper production now has to go over twice the current production. And in the midst of all that, China is controlled, for example, the 70% of supply chains for electric cars and batteries and technologies, and the Republic of Congo controls all the cobalt. So it's not really the amazing tonnages that we are not getting that we should get in order to materialize everything. But also there is a lot of, let's say, cartels out there who control a significant amount and control the markets. So going back to the Paris Agreement, the Paris Agreement more or less eliminated the traditional energy trilemma. The traditional energy trilemma, and I like to use Greek words as well on that, was simply that you use all of the above, whatever it is. And therefore the trilemma asks for 3 pillars: energy availability, dependability, and affordability. Now, I understand with the Paris Agreement there were new considerations, primarily environmental considerations. So after much discussion and various other kinds of manipulations, the current trilemma is a little bit different. It has 3 pillars which cannot be looked upon independently. They're all connected to each other. And the best way to describe those 3 is by saying energy security, environmental security, and economic security. And what happens here, we've done wonderful well on some aspects of energy security, something towards environmental security, and have totally failed on economic security. So let us be a bit more specific on the implementation of all these green transition kind of situation we have. We have a tremendous increase in green energy production. That is definitely to be recognized. But we also had escalation of energy prices, with electricity not affordable even to some people in the developed world. Actually, it took a long time to realize that it is much easier to run a manufacturing company who requires a lot of power in a country or in a location of low cost. So recently, according to McKinsey consultants, what they did was they said most of the clean energies of Europe, who had also outlets in the US, moved that business, for example, the semiconductor business, into the US because of the much less power. And they went on to say that the US GDP in the beginning of 2024 was 8.7% higher than pre-pandemic levels, where the equivalent in the Eurozone was barely 3.4%. And they attributed all that to the difference and the movement of manufacturing to countries of less energy cost. I will also say something that will be discussed later. Another impact of all that was the development, or rather the reorganization of the coal field or the producing areas in the world to become, we see this in the US in the Appalachian coal communities. This is something that we see in Greece also quite a bit, and some of the Balkans. We develop what we refer to the US environmental justice communities out of a previously thriving communities. And the so-called just transition has never worked and is not working the way it is tried to be applied. So let's go back now to some real bad news. In 2023, our emissions increased. It didn't go down, although we had all this new green power. Why is that? Well, the developing world decided they're going to burn anything that they can to get power. So India, for example, in 2023, had more coal burning facilities than the entire North America and Europe combined. In this time, that the most recent sort of numbers show that China is doing 58% of all coal production, and that is increasing tremendously because they are now gasifying coal to produce syngas in order to feed their chemical industry. So here is what is the bottom line. If we continue with the current national climate plans, we will be able to potentially decrease emissions by 2.6% by the year 2030. What was the anticipated from the green energy? It was not 2.6%, it was 43%. This is a major failure. And that's why everybody, including the International Energy Agency, they said we are not meeting the goals, period. And they went back into something that before, at least the International Energy Agency, very shy to say, maybe what we should do is we should let the developing world burn whatever and start requiring or funding carbon capture and storage, because otherwise they won't survive. This is in a recent article from that, which they said the developing world needs not just a lot of money, an eclipse, I like that they use Greek words, an eclipse of funding in order to satisfy this. So leave me now to discuss my final point, and it's a very recent one, is the COP29 in Baku. As you recall, there was big discussion about all the participants of the green transition and the Paris Agreement. What is going to happen with the global South, who cannot really meet any of those restriction requirements or not interested to meet? At that point, that part of the globe suggested an $1.3 trillion of annual financing for X number of years. The amount of money that was agreed before was 100 billion per year. Now, of course, going from 100 billion to 1.3 is a big step. Eventually, after negotiations, they settled to 300 billion per year to go towards the developing countries up to the year 2035. They also said perhaps the private sector can add more money to get to 1.3, where those nations had actually originally asked. So, according to some observers, that meeting was a failure because it didn't provide the money. But I have a different concern. The Paris Agreement was done in 2015. It's basically more or less 10 years ago. Countries and governments, they were different 10 years ago when that was developed. Things are totally in a different wavelength right now. The developed world has their own problems, financial problems, investment problems, taxation problems, keeping the community right, all sorts of kind of problems. And a prevailing thinking that started from one country, but it goes to most. Let's make our country great again. I actually seriously question if the 300 million that were promised in the meeting in Azerbaijan will ever materialize to even 100 million, given the current situation we have. At least in this country, we're going to go back very soon to all of the above. And I would say more or less other countries have done the same unofficially. A good example of that is Germany, who put a big new coal-fired power station in the year 2020. And then they said that they're going to run it till 2038. And that was part of their transition, where Greece had a wonderful new power plant on Ptolemaida 5. And now they said they're going to shut it down by 2 or 3 years from now and get rid of an investment of 1 billion plus and miss all this power that we can have it out there. So with that, I will stop here, but I wanted to be sure we understand if we're working for a green transition, we're under an umbrella from the Paris Agreement of what needs to be done, and that is not happening.
Okay, thank you, Michael, and it's very informative and refreshing, actually, to see some of the numbers. Even the 300 billion, it's like, from 100 billion to 1 trillion to 300 billion for money that don't exist, really. Most of this is hard to come by, and the political will is not there. So are we talking about the environment or something else? Actually, the question is it a political conversation or a scientific conversation? Because the more I get into it, the last 10 years or so since I'm directly involved, I see mostly the political aspect being emphasized through some help of the scientific part of it. And you're a scientist, you're definitely from the scientific part of it. You are into the thick of the
science. Unfortunately, science is taking how can I say, a more engaged role with politics, and that shouldn't be the case. I think the facts are very simple. They're not politically oriented. It's just that we don't have availability of raw materials, that people need energy. And if they need energy, they need to do whatever they can possibly do to get it if they don't have it. And reducing emission is not their priority. Now, if they can motivate the developed country to give them 300 billion to build better facilities, they will do it. If not, they keep burning what they're burning now, and they need to burn more in order to get power. This is how it is. This is the world today.
It's actually worse. I mean, South Africa, which is a great example of how things can go bad. They stop burning coal, and they are a major producer of coal. And now they have like power electricity cuts for most of half of the day. They don't have any electricity, where they used to have 24-hour electricity, because they could not get the funding to finance the new plants that they needed to build, because these plants have a shelf life. They're not they're not meant to be forever.
Well, remember in South Africa, like in Germany years back, they survived by gasifying coal and creating oil, right?
Yeah, Fisher Tropsch.
So, right. Germany fought an entire world war, squeezing oil out of coal, or fuel out of coal. And that's what South Africa was doing during apartheid. And what it is important, because of the lack of power, the mines, South Africa is a huge mining country. The mines are underproducing significantly, particularly the platinum mines, which all of you guys know you use catalyst out of platinum in your cars, and the prices are going berserk, including gold as well. So they have other repercussions to that. But in essence, as I said, something else to be told. In the green transition, people talk easily, and I'm involved in 2 hydrogen projects. But I can tell you, the only way that these projects can materialize if they have significant government funding. I mean, in the US on the carbon capture and storage, we have most applications are currently in the USA. but financial incentives are very, very strong. For every ton of CO2 you store, you get a bonus of $85. If you, now just think about that. If you're storing 3, 4, and 5 million tons of CO2, the amount of money to the pore owner, the guy who owns the pore space, is a humongous amount of money. He can share the goods. So there is a financial incentive. In fact, in the hydrogen, everybody's aiming for 1-1, meaning $1 for 1 kilogram. Nobody can meet that price. This is the price to make economic sense, but the US government is going to give you $3 as a bonus if you produce 1 kilogram. So we are actually in the US before the Biden administration and during Biden administration even more, having huge government incentives to kickstart these industries. Europe is not doing this, not in any kind of a way. That's why all the progress with CCUS is here in the US.
There are some programs here, but it's just not, it's just mostly studies, I would say, European funded studies for university professors, not actual pilots and stuff.
Well, one other issue that people
about
need to...
Prinos in Greece. But
right, I know. One other issue that people need to appreciate is the business case. I mean, at least in the US, it is expected that the government will help a particular project to develop from research to commerciality on the understanding that can stand alone after the government monies are finished. In other words, they don't want anybody to start a business while the government is paying for it. And when the government stops, then you go bankrupt. So you need to have a business case in order to attract money from the government. And that's how it should be. Not just take monies just for the sake of advancing something without having any potential of business case. I'm quite amazed as a mining engineer who we understand resources and reserves that everybody's talking about gas production and oil production, and nobody's telling us how much it's going to cost. Today, for example, the price of oil is about $60 a barrel, maybe close to 70, I can't remember, somewhere in there. In order for a company to pay all their expenses, the cost and whatever, most probably need to have a production cost delivered to the customer for about $40, $45. Can produce for that amount of money? I question that. So nobody should get very excited when they hear about oil and gas and production. Think about how much it's going to cost. And if it is a losing situation, who is going to fund it?
Well, today Brent is a 72.94 to be exact. I just saw the number. And there are some cases that you can produce oil at $5 or $6 a barrel, like, or between 6 to 8 in Saudi Arabia. And there is some deep oil, fields like offshore fields that is like, 3 or 4 times that. These numbers
Right.
way better.
Right.
And some places,
the commodity...
Big lignite, like in Greece, for example, is between between $6 to $8 a ton. And there are some places you can go deep in the coal mines, like you have in England or Belgium at one point, that you have to with wave, and of course the wages was much higher, and it was much more expensive. So all of this, in the end, it comes into a formula, and whether the electricity has to come at a certain cost that is affordable to most people. I like also to touch upon something that our missing guest, Dr. Kokorotsikos, mentioned, and he sent us a picture of the ESBCA. There it is. This is the Greek ethnico, not systema, but Yorgo, how you say this? You're muted, George.
The National Energy Plan, I suppose.
The National Energy Plan, that's the right way to.
Yeah.
And it's this tells you, starting in 2025, the rapid increase of production of electricity from renewables. And then you see slowly, it says here, the upgrading of the buildings. And there is this is something that actually very hopeful. It has happened. Over 150,000 houses have been renovated in the last about 10 years, if I remember correctly, through a program called Exikonomokatikon, and there is a big, some big savings on energy for the consumer, and was also a program funded by the European Union and the Greek government. And Greece is also called Kombos, it's an intersection of power. There is a new FSRU besides the one in Revithoussa in Alexandroupolis that serves and provides gas from Greece to Moldavia and from one side, and from Greece to Slovakia on the other side, replacing a lot of the Russian gas that was preeminent there. And of course, there is a corridor to Euro-Asia and Euro-Africa that brings power from both Asia and Africa through Greece to the rest of Europe. So we are an important intersection, and there is a lot of things here that, actually CCS has been mentioned, as you can see here.
Sure.
It also says that 2028, there's two things here are happening. The end of using lignite for electricity, and the opening of possibly, say, the Nitikon, of drilling for gas in Greece. And there's been conversation on this for a long time, and George, Minister Stathakis at the time, was the person who signed the agreement with Exxon and the other major companies for the different fields, concessions in Greece. And then you see here at about 2030, biomethane, which actually is easiest of things to do. You don't have to put it in 2030. You can do biomethane at any time, and there is existing simple technologies that you can do that. And the next one, Konstantine, the next slide, it says here, more electric vehicles, no more internal combustion engines, cold ironing in the ports, which is very important because Greece is a big port country for both commercial, but mostly coastal and cruises. And it also says, consistent reduction of fossil fuels in all parts of the economy, and the use of biofuels. And then it says here something very interesting, which I'd like to discuss with you, George. It says the reduction of ECO. ECO is a surcharge Greek payers, electricity payers, is for hyperkinonικών ομάδων, for the places in Greece that are far away, like the islands at the time, that were actually, the islands at that time, 40 or 60 years ago, though, when the EE was Public Power Corporation was founded, was mostly Greek residents. In today's island population is mostly tourists, and there is a big discrepancy. At the time was put that thing there so the people in Athens and Thessaloniki and Kozani, they were actually paying a little bit more for the people in Folegandros not to pay and be able to afford electricity. And then you see in 2040, full CCS in industry, a big increase of offshore wind farms, and total, delignitization, we say in Greece, of electric production by 2040. So this is the program that Greece has put together recently, that was voted, I think, a few months ago. This is a new plan. And I'd like to continue with Dr. Stathakis, because he's built some of these programs during his tenure as a minister of both environment but also development. and give us his view of where is Greece now and where it can be headed. George,
Okay,
welcome.
thank you very much, Konstantine. I'm very happy to participate in this discussion. Let me summarize the basic idea and what went wrong and where does Greece stand today. I will start with the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is based on the European experience. What does the Paris Agreement say? That practically Europe since 1990 has economic growth of, let's say, until 2015, 40 to 50%. So it has economic growth, but it uses less energy. So the basic idea of the Paris Agreement is let's make the projection of the growth versus energy consumption experience of Europe. So it's not a theoretical discussion. It has a practical element in it. And if we do this projection until 2050 or 2030, then we can speed up this process through various measures. That was the one practical element of the Paris Agreement. It took account of the European experience rather than US, China, India, excellent examples that were said before. And the second element was also practical. Renewables at the time, 2015, were approaching prices in terms of production cost of fossil fuels, of coal, of gas. They were approaching, they were higher in 2015, but they were approaching those prices. So the Paris Agreement was tailored, according to my view, very close to the European idea and experience. And therefore, Europe was the first to not only accept the Paris Agreement without hesitation, but also to introduce, to design its policies with the Paris Agreement targets, straightforward. And they did it in 3 different ways. The first idea was, let's develop renewables at full speed and meet our targets for 2030 and 2050. B, use gas as a transition fuel. So forget about coal, forget about nuclear, forget about other things. We will use a lot of gas as much as it's needed. Storage was not in the picture in 2015. It was, but it was not as the main element. And 3, let's save energy in housing, in transport, whatever, in the industry, and say saving energy. That was the basic principles. Now, they did different things through this process, and practically this policy fell apart with the energy crisis, because gas, on which this transition was dependent on, in Europe is a great consumer, the greatest consumer of gas, as you know. It was based on pipeline gas, not liquid gas. Therefore, the strategy collapsed. They had to make a huge transition from pipeline gas from Russia, practically, to liquid gas from Norway, United States, etc. Now Europe gets almost 60% of its gas from those 2 sources, which was both costly and completely different And B, because of the collapse of gas, they had to postpone the use of coal, nuclear, or whatever else. The most important thing is that the European element, which was predominant in energy policy, made a step back and practically allowed national governments to manage the energy crisis with whatever means they wanted. And therefore, we had a variety of national policy, energy policies, depending on the energy mix, depending on how they controlled the market, because the market system, more or less, was designed for a smooth period. And when the energy crisis arrived, the market was not capable to manage the economic and social aspects of the energy sector. So we had a whole system of reform of the energy markets in various countries. And the most important thing of all is that the energy transition was put into question because of the huge cost that it implied after the energy crisis on various sectors of the economy. Agriculture was the primary example. Industry is a major example. The social issue is a major example. The energy transition costs, and at the same time, you have to protect social groups that are in a low-income kind of situation. Europe has a long tradition on that, so a significant part of that transition has a huge cost, a social cost as well. Now, let me come into Greece. Greece practically follows the EU policies on energy since 2015. Greece, we followed practically all three elements of the basic EU policy. A, obviously energy markets, obviously expansion, development of renewable energy by using gas as a transition fuel. So Greece became a hub, actually, of gas. We had the traditional, the development of pipelines with Bulgaria, extended to Serbia, Romania, and so on and so forth. We had supported the great pipeline project from Azerbaijan to Italy through Greece. And obviously, Greece became a hub in this respect. We supported the idea of the FSRU, that of Alexandroupolis, that included as well the existing ports for liquid gas, which are in Attica. And on top of this, we developed the idea of the interconnections with other countries, grid interconnections, and we tried to expand our interconnections with other Balkan countries plus Italy, where we do have an interconnection, but it has to be increased a lot. Now, Greece faces a special issue that has to do with the islands. ECO, that Konstantine mentioned, are the costs we pay for the island, because the islands were burning oil to produce energy. And it is very expensive. I come from Crete. We spend $1 million every day, the rest of Greece, in order to produce energy with the same price as the rest of Greece, because we produce in Crete with oil. So ECO is a huge part of our energy costs. The consumers know each year that there is a significant part of it. We responded to this issue, and me personally, by interconnecting Crete with mainland Greece through a 1.2 billion project, interconnecting Crete with Attica, with Athens, and interconnecting Western Crete with Peloponnesus. So this huge project, which has been completed, the one part, and is under completion, the second part, means that by 2025, the eco part, Crete is the biggest part of the eco part, will be removed. The same is the case with Kyklades, where the projects have been completed, and interconnections also will include until 2030 most of the islands in Dodekanissos. Now, the final part of the European policy was the idea of differentiation of the sources of supply of gas. Beyond Russia, we had the interconnection, the pipelines with Azerbaijan, and within this framework, we developed this idea, not only in Greece, but in Cyprus, Egypt, Israel, of getting an idea of the capacity, the potential that East Mediterranean has for gas production. And more or less, the agreement and the concessions that we made, very similar to the ones in Cyprus, Egypt, and Israel, were done within this framework of diversifications of the sources of supply. There is also this organization that we formed with all those countries, plus Italy. Italy is a great market for gas, and therefore was part of this discussion. And we established the East Mediterranean Gas Forum back in 2018, which is an organization in Cairo that more or less coordinates all those states that are being involved in this idea. Now, things have changed since then, I think, because the EU and the policies have had many consequences, and therefore the Greek case is also indicative of how should I call it, a kind of stalemate in terms of European policies and policy choices that the Greek government has made. Let me summarize the idea of this stalemate. The European Union has kept the targets, but has responded to the energy crisis in a very fragmented way. The market was not functioning. They said, okay, we can reform the market, but at the same time, we cannot reform it very much because things may change, may have negative consequences. So we'll reform it a bit, but in between, let some state over-regulate or other state allow the market to function, no matter how negative it might be during the energy crisis. We had the issue of gas prices, very high. They said, okay, let's do a common procurement process as long as Europe is a great consumer. But this policy did not work. The issue of, which was a major part of the energy transition policy, okay, we have to think that a significant part of renewables will be prosumers type. The producers will be the consumers. That was a major part of putting solar panels in every Mediterranean home. It's the easiest way out. But that was not part of the policy. Part of the policy was large-scale investments in solar panels or in wind farms. So they said, oh yes, that has to be part of our policies. Let's do a Power for the People program and an action plan that will respond to this. They were moving fast to renewables, but at the same time, we knew that the grids, the existing grids, and the investment in grids are not capable to respond to this expansion of renewable. So, particularly with the exception of Germany, Holland, and the Central Europe and France, Germany, international inter-country connections are very weak to respond to this crisis. So we started working on grids, realizing that it requires a huge amount of investment in the coming years. So for each of these problems that arise, that's why I call it a fragmented policy, there was some kind of response, but in a way that it underlined the fact that the general policy had failed, more or less, had to adjust in a very significant way, and the Europe was not ready to find all the available and necessary tools for a smooth transition, as was initially perceived in 2015 and 2016 through the European ideas at the time. So where does Greece stand? Greece, I think, I was minister at the time in 2018 when we submitted the first national energy plan, because all European countries had to submit one in 2018. The difference with the current energy national plan are three main differences. The phasing out of lignite. In our plan, it was a more gradual phasing out. The government that came in office in 2019 preferred an immediate phasing out, even before as you know, the energy crisis, which was a bad decision because during the energy crisis they had to re-employ lignite, as you know, practically 10% of our energy mix. At the time of 2018, it was 15%, not much difference. So this phasing out was one of the main differences. The second main difference was that our national plan at the time was very much based on prosumers. We were planning that by 2030, 30% of the energy production would take renewables, would be in a kind of prosumers, energy communities, particularly in the islands, and so on and so forth. And the third major difference had to do with the itself, the public electricity corporations. It is true that we kept prices stable for 4.5 years by using they who had 50% of the production and 75% of the retail market in Greece. Obviously, its role should have been reduced, but thereafter, I think that PPC has become very much profit-oriented and very much speculative profit-oriented, because the energy prices in Greece, since the crisis, there is no doubt that they have an element of profit inflation and extra profits that were gained through the policies of the public energy company as well. I think that at the current state of affairs, Greece has three options, basically. The first option is give emphasis to the weak points, I should call it. The weak points of the system are the grid system. We have to redesign our policy on grids and how we will speed up this process. The interconnections with the rest of the world, the Euro-Asia interconnection and the new project from Africa. I am slightly, I'm not very much favorable, not against the idea of those projects, but against the idea that there will be cost saving for the energy sector in Greece. Particularly the Euro-Asia project, which is an important project for Cyprus for political reasons, etc., etc. It does not sound, in economic terms, something extremely important in terms of the cost of energy, because there is no. The one from Egypt, it might be probably more profitable than Euro-Asia, but again, we have to check the economics and the statistics of it, if it will work.
Profitable or sustainable?
Sustainable in a way. We have, I mean, the one who has to be
both.
Yeah, could be both. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it will not solve all our problems. Let's put it simply. It needs more than that in order to become of some importance, I think, as it stands. The second idea is that we have to make much more emphasis on the issue of energy saving, and we have done a number of steps. We are going very well with the energy mix. Okay, Greece is at the top of the European countries in terms of renewables, and it's more than 30% nowadays. But the issues are there, and that's the second element. The idea, we are very much, we have issues with energy saving. We have very strong issues with energy storage, and I want to underline that. And I don't think there is an easy way out. And I think that most of the targets that are set for energy transition, particularly in transport, are over-optimistic. This is not going to happen. So we need a major redesign on the scheme that you showed us, Konstantine, in order to become much more practical and realistic. And the final part of the strategy is that we have to decide on energy mix. If gas is not the solution, we tend to overinvest in gas nowadays. We had the traditional gas power energy production stations. Now we have another two, and we have designed another three. I mean, this is the kind of over-dependence on gas that nowadays the market is much better than it was during the crisis. But again, it's a policy with huge investments, while it doesn't look like that it will provide the solutions on the long term. So I underline these ideas in order to make the basic idea as I feel it. The European policy has been fragmented. We try to respond to various problems on the transition with bits and pieces of policy. The same is the case with the Greek case. The cost of this problem and the responses of the Greek case has been that the energy sector is highly problematic now for the Greek consumer, the Greek industry, and the Greek consumer. And so we have to tackle at the same time a fragmented response in Greece as well, with a major problem. We have to bring down energy prices for the next 10, 15 years, while at the same time, because of its advantages, Greece can have more renewables, can become an energy hub, and at the same time provide cheap energy, while today we are unable to offer cheap energy to the Greek consumer.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask everybody a question, actually. We talked about the Paris Agreement. Do we see, in a sense, a collapse of the Paris Agreement? I mean, the U.S. is going to get out of the agreement. There's no doubt about it with the recent election. And based on what I heard, and based on what you were talking about, where every nation is sort of doing their own thing, is, what's the purpose of the agreement then if no one's following the agreement?
I think.
Well, my idea was to indicate why the Paris Agreement was very popular in Europe. Very popular. I mean,
everybody loves the concepts. It's beautiful. It's great,
but it's not. It's not that in terms. It was based on a projection that existed already in the European societies and economies. So it was not coming out of somewhere in societies and economies that were saying, "Oh, this is going to happen." There was a process already in place. That's why the Paris Agreement was part of the European policy. Day two. Nobody challenged it. The United States, depending on their politics, they were. Trump said bye-bye Paris Agreement. Then Biden said, let's get into it. Then now, obviously, Trump will say bye-bye again. But the idea of the Paris Agreement, that was my perception, had a strong European element. While it is an international agreement, it cannot work without the United States, China, India, and the developing world that Mihalis indicated how important it is to have take into account the developing world, which will be developing and has to be developing.
The growing part also, population-wise, that's the only growing part. Is the developing world, Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia.
But in terms of energy, based on what's happening technologically, we're going to require more and more and more power. It's not only the developing world that requires more power, including in the U.S., etc. One thing we haven't talked about is nuclear energy. And Mihaly, I think the last time we spoke, you had this beautiful concept of floating in small nuclear reactors, actually.
Well, yeah, we really tried. I must tell you, I had the pleasure of chairing a meeting between senior government officials and politicians on a session where everybody wanted to know more about small nuclear reactors. So we brought the president of the largest company of those. And even in a fairly, confidential environment, most of the questions he was asked, he said, I cannot tell you this. I cannot tell you this. Simply because this is the lifeblood of the US submarines. But what he did say, and it is impressive, that he wouldn't tell you how long a reactor will last. But he said, I will tell you how long is this public information a submarine will last. It will last for 40 years. So that tells you the reactor is there for 40 years. They have never had an accident. They have never had any issues. They know how to build them. They know how to do with them. And we tried actually on a large project with all our senators here to get one such unit in the coal fields where they have lost all this business and power and all that kind of stuff as a means to encourage more industries to go in. But still, even those small units was a big red flag for the public. It's just not acceptable to have. What I will say, though, is that in Virginia, we have significant nuclear power. And in the last 8 years, we have increased nuclear power by a huge percent without building another power station. We did this by updating existing power stations. But Dominion Energy, which is our company here, has approved already a third unit. They haven't started building it, but I think they will. What needs to be understood here is the huge energy guzzlers we have on these data centers.
Exactly.
One data center basically is equal to one power station.
Yeah.
And that is why what is driving, at least in the US, the whole equation here. We get more and more data centers needing 800, 900 megawatts to operate per year. That's
but I would assume, Mihalis and George, that the data centers are also going to be in Europe also. I imagine at some point.
Currently, most of the data centers are in, because I go there for meetings from time to time, which is in Kazakhstan. That is the European, if you call it European mecca of those data centers and so on. One item I would like to bring though up, in much of the discussion, and just to get George's opinion with his great experience, we bring, and somehow we, in the discussion, confuse the fact that gas is not a green fuel. And when everybody says we'll develop a gas sort of energy infrastructure, what he's saying is that they are using facilities that will produce a significant amount of CO2. If you want to know roughly the comparison, a modern gas facility will produce between 50 to 60% of what was a coal facility. So if you drop down 2 coal-fired plants and you replace with 5 gas plants, you're now producing more CO2 than you did before. So you cannot really use the gas option without carbon capture and storage. Otherwise, you are defeating the purpose. And the second issue that I would like to say, going back to the global stuff, emissions is a global issue. If you reduce all your emissions and China increase all their emissions, that doesn't mean anything to the planet. You're still going to the catastrophe, right? So although most of the supporters of the Paris Agreement came out of the European Union because they're used to work in multi-country agreements, right? They had this kind of pedigree in there versus the Australians, the Canadians, the Americans, the Chinese, which are on their own kind of. But in doing so, you cannot really reduce the emissions in one nation if another nation is making up the difference. So the developing world is the critical point. You cannot force them to use clean stuff if they don't have power. We tried this one. So now they're trying to leverage their position by asking all these billions of dollars for new investments. And that's what is the dilemma of the world. If you don't give them, then you may become green, but the whole world is not changing anywhere.
Well, I mean, you have an example of, it's interesting in Nigeria, they have a lot of gas, the just used to flare it, most of it. And they finally built a system that works, and that reduced the usage of diesel by 10%, because everybody was using diesel for their power generators, because otherwise they would have no refrigeration, no nothing, no internet. And I say this for people to understand how close we're connected, with electricity and power generation, and all the different fuels that were used. Also, I have a question. All industrial revolutions were based going from lower density energy sources, from wood to coal to oil and gas, to higher density. Now we're going from a higher density, we have oil and gas and some coal, a lot of coal around the world, except the US and Europe. We like to say renewables with storage, which before we mentioned that really to build storage, you need all the minerals. It's not just, there is no magic solution.
I think...
have we forgotten the industrial part of it? Because it's really, we need to produce stuff industrially. This is not going to go away in a magical way. We're not going to just make stuff at home that we're going to use a refrigerator.
Yeah, couple of points on that. Most industries now, and I would say this for the hydrogen industry, for example, they are based on operating, particularly if they are green and using electrolysis, they are operating on the basis of 24/7. In other words, they continuously produce. They cannot stop. If they stop, not only they lose stuff, but also sometimes it's not easy to kickstart. So basically, if you're going to use, let's say, hydrogen, and you want this hydrogen to be green, you need to have power all the time, all the day, throughout the year.
Base load, 24.
Well, nuclear can do that for you quite easily, but everything else is quite impossible. And if you are using, so let's say, green power for this, to have green hydrogen, and you don't have any power during the night, and you don't have during power different times, you can't operate. You have to build a gas power station beside it just to pick up the difference. Now, when we talk about storage also, I've been involved in a large project here in Virginia. You need to understand what we mean by storage. To a utility by storage means basically a 3-hour power cut. To others who are running a plant, it means an 8 hours a day storage that they want to operate. So trying to develop large storage capacity is a humongous problem. And one of the issues we dealt with fairly recently here, and it had to do with circular economy, the company who was willing to do the storage was not willing to recycle and remove the batteries when they needed to be changed. They just didn't want to do this. Recycling batteries provides a lot of nasty stuff. So you do have other issues that come with this as well. So in essence, then, trying to get something that will be available 24 hours a day is a huge problem and a huge issue. So, but I wanted to emphasize simply in doing all this gas dependency, basically we just eliminate half of the coal mines. That's what we're doing.
George, we talked about...
But we're not green.
George, we talked about the interconnections, and we mentioned Cyprus, we mentioned Egypt, we mentioned Israel. Where does Turkey fit into this interconnection discussion?
George, you're muted.
Yes, I think with Turkey we are interconnected. We get a lot of the gas through Turkey.
Electricity.
So with Turkey there is a long-standing interconnection. I don't think it has, in terms of the energy system. The other ones were really a new place of development, which was completely different. Now, Turkey, of course, has issues with, as Konstantine mentioned, with somewhere between Katsos and Cyprus. In case we do have pipelines there. In case of cables, even if they have problems, the cables are not included in the international law of disputed areas. So I think it's an overreaction, let's say, on behalf of Turkey, because cables are not included in any dispute, which is the case with pipelines, as you know. But overall, I think that the issues on all this energy international parts of our policies have a dimension of as long as we do not have resolved the issues with Turkey, as we have done with Egypt or Italy.
Partially.
With Italy, there is no partiality.
Yeah.
With Egypt, we came to an agreement. We had a difference of 1%, and I never thought that would be the issue. So I think that it would be a great.
And we need to do with Cyprus as well.
Yeah, but you know.
I'm inflaming the tensions here.
Let me ask.
There is some problem step by step. Israel and Lebanon have done the background, and then Lebanon, Turkey, and Cyprus, and Lebanon, Cyprus, and Israel. Libya.
Let me ask something. Let me make another.
The idea is, at some point, we all hope that things will move in a better fashion than what they were 10 years ago when nothing existed. So practically there are some positive steps in all fronts, which allows us to have some hope that probably sometime in the future we'll resolve these issues as well.
I do have a point. I'll go back. I looked at the most recent statistics that are available about the Greek power distribution currently. And one issue of energy, which is in English, it means a hell of a lot more, and I don't like when we translate it in Greek, it doesn't covers everything, is resilience. So resilience, it can be due war, due earthquakes, due floods, due whatever. Basically, it talks about unplanned events. And at some point, in order to have resilience, you need to have total control of some fuel. Now, in Greece, granted, the only such fuel is lignite. You have it, you can produce it, you can do it, it's going to be there. So it provides that resilience. And even in Greece, after we were reducing in lignite, when the issue came in the Ukraine, the power plants fired up to get us over that. And the same here in the US, when we had the polar front one time, if you remember, all the coal-fired units were put together and move on. So it appears to me, if currently we're doing 10%, I want to reduce it. But at the same time, 10% of our power is imported. So I went to check from where we're importing, and my reconnaissance and speaking to an ex-student of mine who knows all about it because he's in charge of on this stuff, what I'm getting is, with the exception of Albania, all other imported energy is lignite produced.
Yeah.
So basically,
North Macedonia.
Yeah. And
Bulgaria,
basically, with the new laws and requirements on emissions and scope 3 emissions, we are taking over the emissions of those countries where we can do it in the first place by burning our own lignite.
Yeah.
It just makes absolutely no sense to me, this. Now, if we're importing nuclear energy, I would say, okay, we're bringing green stuff. So I think, to me, it would make an absolute sense from the point of resilience to keep one or two power stations in tip-top condition to operate,
Yeah.
and reduce these imports. That will keep the areas of Northern Macedonia from, the Greek Northern Macedonia,
Western
Konstantine,
Macedonia.
so it doesn't become a ghost city, right? And produce a lot of resilience into the Greek system.
Staying
Yeah,
with lignite.
I
Lignite.
agree. I think that we had to do with the phasing out, a more gradual. But the second thing, the issue that you raised, which is very important, is obviously that you will have the backup systems in any case.
Correct.
So you will have power plants for the backup system on the ground of resilience, which will be compensated and paid for. And this is part of the story, because otherwise the resilience issue is a very important
Another
one.
thing there, before you, since we're talking about lignite, there were some studies done about the social cost of delignitization and as percentage of the Greek GDP, and it's quite substantial. And that was even before Ukraine and things happened. And we had the desertification of Western Macedonia. I don't think that's the right word, desertification, but they lost over 10% of their population over the last 10, 15 years, which is not even Ukraine has happened. It hadn't even happened in Ukraine during the war. So this is a critical problem and it has to be addressed. So it's resilience. Plus we have over 3 billion tons proven recoverable reserves. That's a study was done by RWE, the German utility company, and about 40 years ago. And I think those numbers don't change drastically. So it's, is there a role for lignite? I mean, actually, this is something that people tell me not to ask. But
no, I think you should ask it. As a matter of fact, I was going to ask it. I was going to ask: is there a role to increase the percentage of lignite that's being used, not only as a reserve, whatever, but actually to expand, the whole system. And what are the technologies right now in terms of lignite? Are there cleaner forms of that? Number one. Number two, is the fact that we're importing from Albania, etc., because their price is lower?
No, because they have it.
Oh.
We have surplus.
Okay.
But in fact, I hate to go back to the same thing. And George knows more about it than I do. But Greece built, and I can't remember which government started it. Could be possibly the government before Syriza, but I'm not sure. But the beginnings of Ptolemaida V is a wonderfully highly modern lignite power station. Like all projects, it started to be a few hundred millions and end up to over $1 billion. I assume at some point PPC will have to pay this, or somebody has to pay this, or the Greek ratepayer. And it is a very, very clean plan. So what was my push at that point is the same company who instrumented this plant, which was Mitsubishi, also is involved in the carbon capture business, not storage, capture. So if we did carbon capture and storage in that facility, it would be much cleaner than any gas facility. Greece can say, we are the first in Europe to do it, right? And you will keep a significant, not a huge production, but significant production going, which means you're saving the whole region, you're producing zero emissions power, and it is your power, you control it. There's enough lignite to justify that. But even if you don't do that, why should we go, what is the reason to try to shut down in 2028 when the Germans do 2038, after all? They're supposed to be the leaders, they have the Green Party and all that kind of stuff, and they are the last ones to do the transition. They built a humongous power plant, new one, in 2020. So we are not doing this in an effort to be the best of Europe in terms of shutting down coal. were making a huge mistake, I think. What you said, Lou, is absolutely correct, can be done, and there is already a power station who can do it.
Okay, you know that in our plan, we were closing all the old power plants but obviously the only plant that was going to work until 2032 or 2035 was Ptolemaida 5.
Sure.
That was the gradual approach that I mentioned before.
And
That
perfectly
was
logical.
part of the 2018 Energy National Plan because of the obvious rationale. I mean, they did this investment before. They decided it before 2015. Obviously, there was no other rationale than work this power plant until the most extended period possible, because otherwise you replace it with 2 new gas stations, and the environmental impact is more or less the same. It does make a lot of difference in terms of environmental.
But let's look at it the other way.
But
What's the useful life?
you know, in Greece there are the way interests work and are investing in various things.
One thing, George, that
you
I
can
found
throw Ptolemaida 5
right.
in the name of the transition because you need, during the transition with renewables, you need either gas or coal for a number of years.
I noticed my friends from PPC sent me a note and asked him something about price, and it says the production cost of lignite. And so they said to me, the production cost of lignite right now is so much, plus the emission penalty. And I said, okay, now you are loading, but you are loading, I mean, the emissions are not made by the mine, they're made by the power plant. So what I'm saying is you are loading this emission to that. I said, are you judging or pricing gas the same way by saying it's so much, it's going to cost me plus the penalty? Or you ignore that there should be a penalty for the gas? Because I find it, you know what I'm saying? I find it a little strange.
Absolutely, Ptolemaida 5 we would produce together with the price they have to pay for the emissions.
Right.
It will be around 80 to 90 euros. I mean, we have estimated. It was the same price with gas before the energy crisis because gas is more expensive, much more expensive than lignite, and has 50% of CO2 penalty. So practically the price was more or less the same, I think, and it's not the economic issue. It was...
And in fact, if you do carbon capture and storage in a plant
even more
size,
if
you do carbon capture and storage in a plant of that size, your green credits most probably will pay the investment with minimum amount of time, because you're talking about avoiding 3 million tons of CO2 emissions. With about $60 a ton, you're going to get your money very quickly back of the investment of the capture facility.
I mean, there was an issue with that. As I told you, I prefer gradually because at the time, to be honest, I was working with the Germans.
Right.
And I was looking at how they treat this gradualism or not. And they treated it in a similar way. They were downgrading all old power plants. They were... the new plants, they were looking for a 15 to 20 period, a new circle that would allow Germany, which was investing heavily on renewables because it was closing its nuclear plant, to allow coal to go on until 2038. So I think that was the issue at the time, and I think that that's why I've been very critical of the immediate.
I have a question here, though.
Can I say something here of interest? There is a new group in the US, and they're calling themselves the Not So Fast group. And their point is very simply, we can do all the things we want to do, but move the deadlines, because we're not making the deadlines. I mean, there is not really any kind of message from God that says by 2050 we need to be zero. What about if it was 2070 or whatever it is? So that group is called the Not So Fast group. And they are getting a lot of support, and I've worked with them quite a bit, because if you give us another 10 or 15 years, we have much better freedom to get where you are. That's what I said, the deadlines are very fixed and very unattainable with the current plan that it is in place.
Who's created these deadlines? In other words, are these scientists or are these just political terms?
There were so many people that work on the Paris Agreement templates, and I think George most probably know more about it than I do. But they were all, I would say, very committed to get somewhere as fast as we could and as more effectively as we could. And I think the deadlines they put, they were quite unreasonable.
To be honest, I was an economist. I am an economist. At the end of the day, I think that the great idea of the Paris Agreement was an economic one. Renewables are becoming cheap, very cheap. That was the economic rationale behind, and they can compete at the same level with fossil fuels. That was the idea, and I think it was proved right, because in 2018, until then, we were paying 100 euros for renewables. We were paying, when gas was producing energy, for 80 euros. Lignite was 25 euros, but then you had to add the penalty, so it was around 60. So you had this price tag. But suddenly, when I did the last competition in 2018, 2019, the new contracts for renewable were at 68, 65, 63. Highly competitive. I mean, that was the major, should I say, rationale behind this projection on renewables. And that was why industrial nations like Germany not only signed the agreement, but they put it in full speed, because they thought, and probably that with renewables are becoming really, really cheap, and so we can compete with the traditional. But beyond, unless that was the case, I think the Not So Fast group or various other groups would be much more capable, or stop a process, or make it more gradual. But that impetus, this unique, I recall it because it was very crucial for me at that stage, that we were doing more options, we were working on various alternatives, and suddenly I get this price, which was a shock, because they may become very cheap. That was the idea.
Well, one of the issues with Germany, who was pushing a lot of that, it was also, Germany was the larger producer of solar panels. As you know, they're not anymore. In fact, they do zero now. Everything comes from China, because China has the raw material.
I fully agree with all your analysis, which was great, actually. on raw materials and renewables and the issues, the strategic issues, the economic issues, you're absolutely right. It's not a magic solution,
Sure,
Konstantin. There is no magic solution. No.
I think it's one that calls that maybe one time we'll get together in Nafplio, where I come from, in a nice tavern and discuss it in a relaxed atmosphere, or in Crete. You're originally from Chania, I take it, or?
Yeah. This is my place, Chania, Crete.
I have helped very much the university there, the Polytechnio. In fact, I was the first full professor was appointed at some point when I was promised by some political forces, not you, that we will have an energy center. They are similar to the ones like the ones that was developed in Iraklio for what was laser technology and so on. But the then minister changed, and the plans were all went away, and so did I. But I helped them develop a Department of Mineral Resources. There's some good people working there, and I'm in good contact with them.
Well, I established as a minister and financed the center, the research center in Chania Polytechnio that has to do with
Right.
oil and
Right.
Yeah,
I know
as a practical man, I think they're doing a great job. Great job.
I found this conversation very interesting, in particular, George, where you mentioned the Germans and how they were making solar panels. And I imagine that a lot of these technologies are to a certain degree related to these type of issues, whether it's Germany or China with the EV and batteries and all the rest of that. How come no one is supporting nuclear energy, Mihalis?
Well, in the US, I think things will change, and I believe you will see an increase in power, not just by updating current plants, but building new ones. And as I told you, in Virginia, we have already approved a third power plant, and it is up to the utility when to start building it. But like everything else, it takes quite a while. People are a bit antsy on nuclear, but the French proved to be much wiser than everybody. They have nuclear power, and they have their own destiny in hand.
What I thought was interesting is when somebody like John Katsos had mentioned that he's forming a company, for example, to make smaller nuclear plants and make them available. And also other people have jumped into that. Is that correct, Mihalis?
Well, there is 3 or 4 major firms in the US who do that. The one I work is here in Lynchburg, Virginia, headquartered, and they are the main suppliers of the US submarines. So these small nuclear reactors is nothing new and is nothing that needs to be proven. Is already fueling all the US nuclear navy. So everybody knows all about it. It's not, they wouldn't tell us how many megawatts is a unit. I kept asking this, but they said, I can't tell you that. but basically, they say to me that a large one can do most probably the entire city of Richmond. All this discussion was in Richmond, the capital of Virginia, which is a very large metropolitan city. So he said one of them is more than enough for a big city.
Yeah, Konstantine, you had showed that that timeline that you were talking about, and then you were talking about Greece's, what they're going to be doing in terms of electric cars and all the rest of that. But isn't that changing also? Isn't the concept of electrical cars, etc., driven by what the consumer wants also? I mean, aren't we finding a pushback on all this, in particular, the fact that China controls a lot of it?
Most interesting couple in history is Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Electric cars and fossil fuels. And I think this is the only way to do it right now. And data centers with green power, that's another, I think, oxymoron. You need 24 hours cheap power for data centers.
Huge power.
And it's there are a lot of stories out there, but it's good that we speak about these things, because you need to see what the reality is. I mean, we had commercial shipping, and George's family comes from commercial shipping, and Greece is one of the largest commercial shipping country in the world. Greeks own over 24% of global commercial fleet. There were nuclear merchant ships 60 years ago. In a panel about a year or two ago, had Harilas Petrakakos here, which actually is an expert on this shipping and nuclear power, and they use them in submarines, and in Russia they use them into the icebreakers, and for years now. I mean, there's nothing new. It's just a matter of it's the same bucks, let's put it this way.
Well,
and the other problem, though, that this is really important for you, George, you have to have a real industry to use the power. You cannot have the industrialized country having a lot of power, because it doesn't make sense. The numbers have to add up. You have to pay for it. And, we cannot have we have to build the industry along with the power.
Yeah.
Right now, we're at the point that we're de-industrialized to a point that we may go well with solar, which is not, because you actually need, for every megawatt of power, for every megawatt of renewable, you need about a megawatt of base load to keep the system in balance. And those are just simple things, it's just how we match all this and create a model. And Greece can be a hub. I mean, everybody wanted Greece to be a hub since it entered the EU. For whatever reason, it never became one. So let's start thinking about it.
Yeah.
Energy is abound. And actually, what's going to happen with the hydrocarbons? Since we spoke about Crete, there's this story has been going on for a long time, and there are signs that there is serious Zohr is the field in Egypt. Gas field. And we're not that far away from, Crete to Egypt is less than half an hour by flying and few hours by ship. So, and those are huge, great indications. I don't want to use huge, that there's some big fields there. So unless we actually do something, we like Epicurus said, I think I said it in the beginning, Gelan amadi ke philosophin, is what we need is to laugh and philosophize at the same time. So, but at the same time, also do something about it. So I think that was the key, one of the key reasons we had this panel today. And thank you, Lou, for always bringing up great topics.
Listen, it's always our pleasure to do it, and we obviously have to do it again, because there's a lot of things to discuss, and there'll be changes. There'll be changes based on just political aspects, and also within all these nations with electric costs, etc., being very high. What George had mentioned and everybody else had mentioned, people are pissed off. The people are really pissed off at the costs.
Big percentage of Greeks are energy poor, and this is a legal term, meaning that they spend more than 10% of their money that they earn, of their income, for their energy needs. So, and it's a big percent, close to 70 or 80%, if I remember correctly. And that's not going to go away.
Is it a political issue, gentlemen? George, anybody? Is it Konstantine? Is it a political issue, the energy costs, and will it affect the politics of the nation?
One of the top political issues is the energy cost in Greece, and the electricity bills is one of the major issues, together with the other, the housing crisis and things that you find everywhere nowadays, in Canada, in Australia, etc. But the electricity bill, and the question, to be honest, is that electricity companies made huge amounts of money.
Who owns these companies? Who owns these companies?
The one is the public company, and then there are 3 private companies.
Are they Hellenic owned or foreign owned?
2 Hellenic and 1 is Italian and Hellenic. So it's a small group of companies that make practically the last 3 or 4 years, they make $1 billion a year each profit. I mean, so 2019, the electricity market was $6 billion. There was very small profit. Okay, I accept it. That price, electricity price, was stable, and nowadays it's a 12 to 14 billion euros market. I mean,
it's huge. It's huge. All right.
Okay.
So gentlemen, thank you for everything. Konstantine, thank you again for moderating this panel. Let's try to set up another one in a few months. I think it's a very important issue because the politics are also changing as we go along. For the audience, join us in January the 26th when we have the second bipartisan Hellenic American State Legislators Forum, which should be interesting. So we'll meet with the state legislators and discuss with them not only what's happening in their districts in the United States, but also how it affects loss and everything that we're basically talking about. George, I like some of the issues that you brought up on the political end at the end, because I think it's very important. Let me ask you a question. If they went to more lignite and they had the recapturing things that Mihalis talked about, would that drive down the cost of electricity or no?
Well, I'm not very familiar with the cost of recapturing and things like that, and how it affects the penalties that lignite is paying. So, as Konstantine knows, I'm very open to any discussions that indicate that things may move in a more balanced way. No question about that.
Okay. Any thoughts, Mihalis, on what we talked about? I know you don't know. You're more in the U.S., but it seems to me that if you have a lot of energy potential within your own country and you're not using it, there's something wrong mentally. Right. I think there's something deficient with thought processes.
Right. A typical carbon capture project, it depends where it is and so on. It is a bit easier for the Ptolemaida 5 because it is a modern plant and it has all the interactions. Also, the company who built it does also carbon capture. That is quite important. They can easily convert it. But I would say they would be on the 500 million kind of a cost. But that means that you can take about 2 to 3 million tons of CO2 per year, which is the avoided CO2 by converting it, and you multiply by $60 or whatever it is, 60 euro, which is what it is the green market right now. That is quite a bit of money there. So what I'm saying to you is, it is an investment that you can recover to a great extent, not based only on the rates, and you put it to the customers, but you're capitalizing on the green markets, which actually, I must say, is very low for the amount of energy transition the Paris Agreement is saying. At some point, the European market was over $100, it was about 150 or something like this before the war with Ukraine, is now about 70. The California market, which is the equivalent here, the most strict market, so it's not any so-called greenwashing going on and bullshit kind of credits. Yeah. But that is about 30, 35 is less. But one of the things that Europe needs to do is to improve this green credit value, because that makes more cases of green technologies business cases. And that's what the US is doing. The US, as I told you, is giving huge credits for carbon capture and storage, huge money for hydrogen. I mean, really big money, which makes a difference to a developer who can recover his money within a reasonable amount of time.
Thank you for that. Konstantine, some final thoughts before we head out?
You're muted.
You're muted.
You make more sense now.
Finally. So Greece has to actually do a couple of things in a more innovative way, I would say. It has to base a lot of its decisions based on European funds, RRF, which is actually, part of the transition. They're not endless, and they're not something that can be renewed, And Europe is actually maybe not have the money to actually give at the end of the day, all of the money. There's a big chunk of money promised for the transition in Western Macedonia, and actually every time I speak to people about it, the money becomes less and less. And in the end, there'll be no money, and there'll be nothing actually done, or not much done there. So have to be creative, attract investment, figure out what the barriers are and what the incentives that should be given, and we have to be actually make it happen and it's a different path than it is in the United States, which is a superpower on its own. And we have to use our own sources. Whatever we have here, we have to use. The more we depend on other people, the higher the risk.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us today. And what you mentioned also is important, because you mentioned Ukraine, you mentioned Russia. Obviously, hopefully the next time we meet, hopefully the war will be over and the dynamics are going to be completely different. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm waiting in Crete for you. Okay.
We will be in Crete. Take care, guys. Thanks again. Thank you. Bye-bye.